Hi. Good morning, everyone. 48 hours ago, I was out with a tree planting crew in 72-degree weather, so I'm glad to be back inside talking to you this morning. Great turnout, by the way. I'm Scott Daniels. I've been with the Forest Service for 34 years. I'm project manager, which means I take care of Dorchester, Wicomico. Work with private landowners, just like yourselves, in helping them manage their forest land. One of the problems that we're dealing with here in Dorchester County is the southern pine beetle. Heather has worked with me in great detail in trying to not only identify this insect, but how we go about controlling it or managing for it. This is the typical popcorn pitch tubes that you'll find on trees that are being actively attacked. I didn't mean to do that. This area is showing all these dead trees. This is down in the Andrews area of Dorchester County. If I can encourage anything to a private landowner through my two talks today, it's be vigilant, walk your property, keep an eye on your property, because these insects, if they take hold on your property, are very, very difficult to manage for. So walk your properties every 6 months, every year, to keep an eye on invasive species and also invasive insects. Southern pine beetle is always present in your woods, always. They're out there, but they need the right conditions to manifest themselves. Okay? What are these conditions that will lead to southern pine beetle infestation? It has to be a stress on the trees. It can be a lightning strike, soil compaction due to development. Saltwater intrusion is the big reason that we have southern pine beetle here in Dorchester County. Sea level rise and saltwater intrusion is creating a tremendous stress on our loblolly pine resource, not only in Dorchester County, but any areas on the eastern shore that have tidal influence or salt marsh. The last known infestation was in 1998 down in the McKeel subdivision in Madison here in Dorchester County. That was a direct result of soil compaction. It was a subdivision where they actually cut ditches to drain the water off the sites, but allowed salt water and tide to come up into these areas. These people that paid big bucks for these wooded lots ended up having to harvest their trees off their lots. They no longer have wooded lots. If they did not do that, that insect would have continued to infect the rest of the pine trees in that subdivision. Question?
Well, if you would then replant your forest, my question is, why on earth would you go back and plant more? Why not put in many different trees to prevent people?
Okay. From what I can remember, the landowners relied on natural regeneration in that area, which probably meant a lot of loblolly pine, probably water bushes, wax myrtle, red cedar, the native species. But we'll talk about how you can do things to your property to prevent southern pine beetle from reoccurring. Again, this was simply a result of the development pressures in that area. This is a slide that Heather also showed you. But this area is in Dorchester County. This is the Andrews area, Wesley Church area. This was in 2015. I get around the county pretty well, but I can't be everywhere. A landowner came into my office and said, "Can you tell me what all these brown, copper-colored trees are down in Andrews? What's going on down there?" I said, "I don't know. I hadn't been down there for a while." I drove down this road, and I got to about here, and it was an unbelievable sight. There was probably 30 or 40 acres of red trees. right in this area right here. It was obvious to me the landowner that owned that property either didn't see it, was a absentee landowner, or didn't care. But because of the infestation reaching epidemic proportions here, that southern pine beetle had a chance to take hold and spread to over 300 acres of infestation. All that red area is dead, and since this slide was made, that has spread continuously in a western expansion. Last year, Heather and I found several spots down in the Crapo area, Asquith Island area. Again, it's being driven by saltwater intrusion, rising sea levels that's stressing those trees. Okay, what can be done to prevent or at least ease the outbreak of southern pine beetle? This was mentioned earlier. Keep the stands healthy and vigorous. Okay, the healthier a tree is, the more likely it's able to withstand an attack of southern pine beetle. If you remember those pitch tubes, as Heather explained, the pitch and the sap is trying to wash that insect out of that tree. A healthier tree may be able to do that. But if you let the populations increase to the point that they did in Andrews, that's probably not going to help. Monitor your woods. I can't emphasize that enough. Whether it's dealing with insects or invasives, private landowners need to have a real interest in monitoring their woodland. We can't do it. You know, we can't continually walk all the properties that we deal with on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. Remove high-risk trees. Again, this goes back to monitoring your woods. If you notice a lightning strike tree, it doesn't always mean you're going to get southern pine beetle, but that tree is very susceptible to attack, and you may want to consider taking that tree out if you find it. Keep soil disturbance to a minimum. Okay, the compaction of the soil will definitely influence the health of that tree. And the big problem here in Dorchester County, keep salt water out. A lot of people use floodgates in ditches that allow fresh water to drain out, but will not allow that salt water or tide to come up in those ditches. It's a very common thing in South Dorchester to see these floodgates. Okay, problems specific here in Dorchester County. I work with private landowners just like yourselves. Many times when we have southern pine beetle, it encompasses 50, 60 different private landowners. We can identify the problem, and Heather took great lengths to send out letters to every private landowner that was in that southern pine beetle area, whether it was in Andrews or Crapo. How many letters did you send out? You remember? Okay. So we tried to contact, Heather contacted 100 different private landowners that either had southern pine beetle or were in the path of the spread of the southern pine beetle. So that's a real problem. We're not dealing with one or two large landowners. Okay, access to the properties is limited, and we'll get into that with some pictures. Most of these areas are located in wet, marshy areas. Southern Dorchester, Wicomico County has marsh, Somerset has marsh. So that, to me, is the driving force, is wet, salt, rising water tables. And we're pretty flat here. Once we get a flood tide, if that water recedes, that salt stays in the soil and is leached down into the soil. So that salt's going to stay there. Back in 1933, we had a severe hurricane. Southern Dorchester County was full of tomato fields and canneries. When that flood of 1933 occurred, there was so much salt in these fields that they were abandoned. The canneries closed up, and it's been a gradual process since then that fields are being abandoned all the time and left to grow back into natural vegetation. Critical area. How many of you are familiar with that term, critical area? Dorchester County is 60% critical area, which means the critical area is defined as 1,000 foot from any tidal influence. So if you have a ditch that has tide in it, you go back 1,000 foot, that area within that 1,000 foot is considered critical area, and it's a whole different ball game when you come to regulations and what you can and can't do in the critical area. So they're specific to Dorchester County, but every county on the shore has some critical area. This is what I was talking about with private landowners. This is the Crapo area. When you have fat fingers, that's what happens. Each one of these blue dots represents individual landowners. So Heather took it upon herself to locate all these landowners' addresses and mail them a letter explaining what they either had or potentially could have on their property. That's a real issue in trying to eliminate southern pine beetle. And this is what we're dealing with in terms of habitat. I don't know if you can see back here, but those trees are dead. This is how a logger would have to get back to that area to access this landowner's timber. There is no way that a logger is going to leave a high, dry site where he's cutting to come down and try to help that landowner eliminate southern pine beetle on that property. Again, more of the habitat. This is an interesting picture because when Heather and I were contacted by this landowner, this timber on the right-hand side was already dead and had been dead for at least a year. When the bark starts to come off the tree, that's an indication that that tree's been dead for quite a while. The only access into this property was this right here. It's drivable, It's drivable for a pickup because this is a hunt club and they have quite a nice area back here. But in terms of logging, trying to get a timber company in there to harvest those trees, and again, the only way to control southern pine beetle on a large scale is to harvest those trees that are being actively attacked, remove them from that area before they have a chance to attack healthier trees. That access into that property is a real detriment to any logging company because there's an expense in putting mats down or gravel trying to access that timber. What this shows is, this is the southern pine beetle area in Crapo. This right here is the critical area line. That's saying that anything this side of that blue line is critical area. This is showing the multiple parcels that are involved. And this is also showing this grayish area is marsh or salt influence that's continually invading these strips of woodland here. So these are kind of a synopsis of all the problems that we're dealing with here in Dorchester County and also on the Eastern Shore. Okay, this slide, this is in Andrews. This brown here is all dead loblolly pine. And what I want to show you is that this line represents how the marsh and salt water has encroached on this woodland. This is 2006. This is 1994, 2006, 2015. That's how much that salt has encroached on this woodland. This is where southern pine beetle got started, right in this area. When I first looked at it with Heather, this area right here was pretty much dead, but it continued to spread south. It jumped across the road here, and this is all dead now. What we were able to do, this particular landowner had already sold their timber to a logging company. It wasn't supposed to be cut for another 2 to 3 years, but because of the spread toward that timber, they were able to harvest this timber, and Dorchester Lumber, who owns this piece, was able to get in there and clear cut their timber. They weren't ready to cut it, but it was pretty obvious that with the spread, the westward spread of that southern pine beetle, that they were kind of in the bullseye for that beetle to take hold. So, yes, sir.
Just real quick, unlike gypsy moth, the pine beetle will move into the wind.
Heather might be able to answer that. I think they do, but
Well, if it's moving west, you can't go back.
On their emergence flight, they're very strong flyers in the spring. So they could, they'll go wherever the smell takes them. Remember that pheromone says that there's good trees, either by the population releasing their pheromones or by stress trees, those beetles are going to move in that direction.
okay. Any questions? I'm getting the cut sign. Yes.
Scott, is there any value in the trees once they're infected?
Yeah. They retain their value for maybe 6 months after they're infected. But again, Heather touched on that blue stain. And the longer you leave a tree out there, the punkier it gets, the more rotten it gets. Again, the big problem with logging in any of this area is this is an extremely low piece of wood. So there is value if you can get to it soon enough. Once the bark comes off the tree, those trees are worthless.